We will get a start. Okay, folks, good morning, good afternoon, early evening to the folks in India. Hey, thank you very much. Happy New Year. First inaugural Head 6 Gupshup. I am delighted. I think a number of you know me, Natraj, I go by Nat. I'm delighted to have Viral Acharya, quite a polymath, an amazingly interesting person with a multitude of interests, accomplishments. And very coincidentally, the number of connects to me and Viral are quite a few. My sister-in-law, Veena, and Viral are classmates from IIT Bombay. That's my Aruna's sister. And my nephew, Arvind Krishnamurthy, who's a professor at Stanford. Arvind and Viral do collaborative research in economics. Both of them, all three of them are very, very accomplished people. And I'm sure one of these days we'll see one or all of them in the Nobel Prize roster. So delighted to have Viral. Viral, take it away. Again, very friendly audience. One thing which unites all of us is Hostel 6. We might not have gone to the same classes, but we ate in the same mess. And as Ramesh Vangal often likes to say, we all relieved ourselves in the same bogs. So we have a lot in common. So please, great to have you. Really appreciate you making time. They keep it very interactive. Again, it's a very open session. The goal is really to bring the Head 6 community with a very, very tight-knit network when we were back in Hostel 6 to, after many, many years, after many, many time zones and miles, keep the team together. That's really the goal. Okay. Yeah. Viral, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Nat. It's my pleasure to be here. First of all, I'm really delighted to be doing this. I think it's a super innovative initiative. I think I wish there is more like this for sort of hexalites around my batch. I think I'll stick to the sort of rough plan that was suggested. So maybe just a little bit of a background. I'm basically a Bombayite in long and short. Born in Bombay, I grew up in South Mumbai in an area called Girgam, Chira Bazaar. Formerly, the street was Kasda Street, but around that time you grew up in all the gullies around you rather than just the gully where you lived in. I'm from a Gujarati family. My father and mother are both Gujaratis. My father was also born in Mumbai, but my mother was born in Anand in Gujarat. But my maternal grandfather was a tax collector and he moved to Mumbai, and that's how my home family moved as well. Actually, an interesting detail is actually the more relevant detail might be my grandfather, whom I never saw, my paternal grandfather. He was actually one of the leading Ayurveda Vaids of the country. His name is Vaidya Vachaspati, as they called him.
Oh my goodness.
Vachaspati Chadavji Trikamji Acharya. And actually what brought him to Mumbai was the fact that he first started in Porbandar, where he was born. Then they told him, okay, Porbandar is very small for the knowledge and everything you're putting together on Ayurveda. You must move to Ahmedabad. So then they moved to Ahmedabad. Then they said, no, Ahmedabad is too small. You really need to take your work to the country level. And then he came to Mumbai, and then that became his base. And he was really a deep scholar of the subject, but my sense is he was just a deep scholar. Apparently, he knew and could converse and write in some 8 or 10 Indian languages because he was trying to take Ayurveda to like different parts of the country. He basically did like a taxonomy of all the Ayurvedic recipes over the sort of hundreds of years. And my father, who's otherwise an allopathic doctor, he's an oncologist. Once he stopped practicing, actually, he went back to what my grandfather had done. And he has been converting his Sanskrit books into Gujarati, Hindi, and English so that these recipes for various treatments, etc., are not entirely lost as Sanskrit falls out of, even readability and at least certainly flavor. So anyway, when I apparently he used to wake up for a change, I woke up at 4:30 today, but apparently he used to wake up every day at 4 a.m. and do his research and writing before actually his day started and before the patient started coming for treatments and so on. Anyway, that's on the sort of little bit interesting lineage. My wife, Manjiri, she's from Maharashtra. She's from Pune. She also has a very impressive, both her parents are engineers, but my late mother-in-law, Professor Suman Sok, she was actually the first woman engineer of Maharashtra, but probably also of India. So she studied in Pune University. She did civil engineering at a time when there were no, separate bogs for women, no changing rooms for the lab for women. So, she fought against her family, paid her own way to get through the engineering. And so anyway, very, very impressive figures on both sides to look up to and get inspired by. So then, what else? I went to a school in Mumbai called Fellowship. It was a all-out Gujju school. I have to tell you a few funny things about my school. We were about 200 kids in 4 divisions. And I think in my grade, sort of my cohort, only 4 of us did science. And everyone else was in commerce or went straight into diamonds and other family businesses. And I had a really funny conversation when I joined IIT. So we all got together, all of us school friends. We used to play a lot of cricket, together in Gully and Bombay Gymkhana and all that. So after the 12th exam and IIT exam, we all got together. We were all going to start out our respective careers. And so, someone asked me, we met at Suksagar, near Chowpatty, where you can eat idli and all that, idli, pav bhaji and all that. So because that used to be like very close to our school hangout. So one of them asked me, so what's your plan? So I said, I'm going to IIT. So he said, where is that? So I said, it's in Powai. And then I heard 2 of them quietly telling each other, see, even if you study and do well in 12th, you have to go to Powai to pursue your studies further. So for them, lot of Indians were like moving from like different parts of the country to Mumbai and Powai. For them, even to go within Mumbai to Powai was like, oh, itna kaam karna padega, to pursue your education further. So it was quite interesting to actually sort of grow up in that school in a way. So actually what is it shows how important the teachers are. Like there was one school teacher, of course, we had a set of teachers who were all really excellent, but there was one school teacher who took it upon himself that our school had never had a student in the state merit list, the top 50 grade in the SSC exam. And he took it upon himself as a challenge that why can't we do this? Why is our school never on this merit list? So it was a little bit of like being in the right place at the right time, where we were in a batch where he and a few other teachers collectively said, okay, let's work on these kids. And it's not like completely undifferent from this Hrithik Roshan movie that came, what is it, like Super 30 or something like that?
Yes.
This was a Hrithik Roshan movie that came out recently. But he kind of really championed my case, and he gave me like free tuition after school. For maths and science, he got me help from a teacher in another school, from modern school. And we were sort of okayish, but financially, I don't think we could have afforded that time, like private tuition and all that. But but he kind of figured that once he figured that, he did it all for free. But I think what I think is like, it was not so much what he gave to us, but it was more like that ambition, that, aspire for something that's not been done. And in the end, it worked out. Like, I think I was third in the SSC board exam, and I think which for the school was like a really great thing. And then, for a while, then I lost track of what I want to do in life. Like cracking exams became like an end in itself. And so I did well in HSC, I did well in the JEE. And then I took computer science. I don't know why I took computer science. I had no interest in the
What was
subject.
your JE rank, Viral?
My Hava was 5.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think it was. I think my sense is I'm not being modest. I don't think I deserve to be Hava 5.
No, that's you. That's you.
No. I think my sense is my JE should have been like. I think something in the hundreds would have been, I think, like a fair representation.
You're being very modest. That's a great thing.
No. Because, even on the last stretch of the last 2 months, like I was learning from folks who got 9 and 11, and it's like they should have beaten me by like a big margin. So my theory is that the 3 looked like 8 in one of my exam scores or something like that.
Yes. All good.
So, but anyway, I did computer science, but I never took a terrible liking for the field, actually, I must confess. And even though, of course, so much excitement was happening in computer science in the 90s. But I think I missed, maybe because I did sort of more math and theoretical computer science, which at that time was not as applied, actually. In mid-90s, frankly, if you did theoretical computer science out of your PhD, it was even hard to find a job. It wasn't like today's world in which, Amazons and Microsofts and Google Research are like hiring the top computer scientists, even in theory. You had to typically work for like several years of postdoc before you found a faculty position. But something was missing for me. I felt I was not touching people. I was losing perspective of sort of the humanity in the midst of all that computer science. So then I just decided to switch fields. I had no idea what could be alternatives to consider. We had a family friend who was also an IIT Bombay, right? He graduated in 87, Purva Koticha. His father and my father were like thick pals. And he, after doing PhD in finance, was like a very, very successful trader, like minting money left, right, and center. So I said, like, this looks, if I had to pick another career without knowing anything, this is like a good role model to follow. So, he was a very successful interest rate derivatives trader with Solomon, Smith Barney, then Citigroup, then a hedge fund. But I think what he told me is that finance is an interesting field because it's very applied, but it can also be very analytical if you want. And so then I did my PhD without knowing too much about finance. But I think in the end, it was a right call, even though I was like shooting in the dark when I changed my fields. It was more out of not wanting to do computer science than out of wanting to do finance. But in hindsight, I feel I have a lot more aptitude and passion for this field. So I think it was the right call. I thoroughly enjoy learning about economics and finance and how it sort of interacts with people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And one thing I like about the field is that, and I think you must have observed this, that if you put me today in a group of computer scientists, being a non-computer scientist now, I will not be able to contribute anything to the conversation. I actually met some folks who were talking about semiconductors and graphene and, like the latest stuff happening in programming and AI and machine learning. And I can absorb some buzzwords, but I can't really contribute in a meaningful way. In contrast, I find economics and finance, every Tom, Dick, and Harry can contribute to the conversation. In fact, they would have the strongest opinions on finance and economics. And I just love that. I just love that you sit on a dinner table and no matter who you are, whether you are the treasury secretary, finance or economics professor or not, once you get into talking about finance and economics, everyone thinks their opinion is absolutely spot on, and not that of the treasury secretary. So there's something very nice about that. There's something, it means that the field is really touching the common man. The common man has a very strong opinion about things you are studying about. And of course, that means it's probably not as much of a science as computer science is. That it's because, you know, the technical advances in computer science prevent me from actually contributing much without understanding the technicality of the field. Whereas I think economics and finance remain, in my view, sort of half science, half art. And I think it's because there is human behavior involved. I think human behavior is inherently very complex. It's hard to model it. It doesn't remain stable over time. It changes a lot from year to year. And so maybe that's kind of like the fun part of it. Maybe it is as hard as the fields of electrical engineering, which I was always looking around, you know, can I touch them somewhere? Like, where are these fields? But there is something about human behavior and its complexity, which is, I think, in the same way. You can see it, but it's very hard to describe it in a very precise manner as to what is driving people to behave in markets and their decision making.
So, Viral, what is Hostel 6?
I'll stop here. I think I've given enough.
No, that's all good. Tell us about your time in Hostel 6. What room, what wing, where did you start?
Yeah. So
what is the wing dynamics like? Yeah.
Yes. So how did I end up in Hostel 6? I think on that day, there used to be like a welcome day before you joined IIT. You came to IIT one day and you kind of like toured around. You had to pick your subject that day and it was announced whether you got the field you had picked or not. And I think a couple of seniors from Hostel 6, they kind of like picked me up along with a few other guys for ragging, I think. And then we were told that we are being given an introductory tour of Hostel 6, but of course, it was less of an introduction and more of sort of, bossing around. But I think, a couple of them took liking to a few of us. And I think there is some process that time where you could bid for some freshies, you could like put in a request for some freshies to come into some hostels. And so I think they put in a request or I put in a request, I don't remember, but we got Hostel 6. And then most of the times you didn't get into a wing right away. The freshies had to share rooms on the ground floor.
Oh.
But I think a couple of us were, because this wing was batting for us, and this wing was Ghat wing. It was full of Maharashtrians. And I'm Gujarati, but I could speak fairly fluent Marathi, being a Bombayite and having a lot of Marathi friends in Girgaon and all that. So 2-3 of us came into this wing. It was a Ghat wing. Of course, it wasn't all Maharashtrians, but core of it was, I think, Maharashtrian. I was in room 269 for most part, I would say, of my stay. And it was a very, very interesting wing, actually. Probably it was the most musical wing, actually, the time I was there. Actually, I was not into music much at all. I was a very avid listener and passive consumer of music until I reached IIT. But there were 3 absolutely phenomenal singers in my wing, 2 years senior to me. And I think they all sing now, but one of them, Puneet Joshi, has his own band in Bangalore called Dvi, like 2.5 Dvi.
Yeah.
He performs very regularly in Bangalore. Another guy lives in New Jersey, Anshuman Patwardhan, or Popat as we used to call him. And another guy, Rahul Parulekar, he lives in California, I believe. And somewhere near Palo Alto, I think. And they were all very phenomenal singers. In fact, Mao was my kind of next room mate. And the intensity of his guitar playing used to increase with the proximity to the midterm exams and the final exams. And like he couldn't focus on electrical engineering. And so the moment he had to be put down to with books, he would start playing the guitar. And, so I was the only guy who survived him because everyone else used to just quit being his neighbor because they couldn't focus on like studying even before the exams. But they were the ones who made me sing forcefully in a freshy competition first. And I don't think I sang very well, but they gave me a consolation prize. And I think I took that recognition very seriously. So then I started practicing after that. And then they made me debut in like a hostel valedictory function. And they were all stunned with my not missing a note. I don't think I sang very well, but they said you did miss a single note. You didn't like sing off. So then that gave me like extra loads of encouragement. And then in my third year, I sang for the first time on stage in with like a band and all that in Sur Bahar. And then, so to me, and when I think about IIT, probably in terms of what it gave me, besides the friendships and the lovely time there, actually music, which is now like such a huge part of my life, there is practically no night like when I basically don't listen to some 70s, 80s Kishore Kumar songs or 60s, whatever. But that all kind of came through from my wing actually in IIT, like that depth of music and interest in music. So it's interesting when I look back at it. Was it about computer science, engineering? No, of course, friendships are always there. But the biggest contribution my wing and IIT made to me was actually music. So I'm sort of forever grateful for that, for unpacking something that I think I would have never discovered it otherwise.
Yes.
Like it's like such, and it's nothing. I'm not doing anything substantial with it, but if you, it's the high point of my life. It's like every day I bike or walk to NYU. I'm biking, I'm singing songs. I walk, I'm singing songs. I'm not thinking about research or anything. My son thinks I'm crazy that I sing on the street when I'm walking. But that's what IIT gave me. So what I used to do is we were in a joint family that time. So I used to go for long walks to Marine Drive to sing. So I used to just walk over to Marine Drive and walk all the way Nariman Point to Marine Lines, or on the other side to whatever the Malabar hillside. And I just used to do it to sing, and I used to feel this is like the best thing that can happen to me, be on the road, no one knows you, and you just start doling out Kishore Kumar song.
That's Bombay for you, right?
Yeah. No, so that was IIT, and then I applied for computer science engineering to NYU. But I realized only late in my last year that I didn't want to pursue computer science, but it was too late that time to apply in finance. So I came to NYU, still did 1 year of computer science. Thankfully, everything we had learned at IIT was good enough for the first year of PhD in computer science at NYU, at least. I even took the qualifiers, but then I had already decided to switch my major to finance at that. So yeah, it was kind of, at some level, you could argue that it's like a gap in the CV, those 4 or 5 years, like they don't connect very well to anything. But in some ways, they were the most formative years because they helped me explore and find myself in a way that I hadn't before, and maybe I stopped exploring after as well. I think. Yeah.
So how about your getting a PhD after that, Wall Street, walking into one of the many firms would be a natural thing, academia.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that
Yeah,
process?
so that was an interesting debate. So because I was sort of getting into finance because of this person, Apurva Koticha, who was like making like $1 million with a trade every day. I did feel that I should at least consider it. So I worked 3 summers at JP Morgan,
Oh,
96, 97, 98. I tried all three fields, sort of equities, fixed income, and credit markets. But it was all very good. I was doing well. I think I could have been doing cutting edge work if I had joined industrial. So I just didn't like the lifestyle. I basically said that I don't want to. It felt like a black hole. It's like, especially early on, to prove yourself. It looked like everyone was just living there from like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Working on the weekends, starting your breakfast there, even packing your dinner while you were leaving. And they made it so comfortable to do that. You could take like a black cab back with a voucher, and it was like everything was made comfortable to basically for you to spend 100 hours of your week in the office there. And it just felt like this is a horrible lifestyle, that I'll get sucked into it. And so at some point I decided that no, I need to be able to wake up and sing Kishore Kumar songs rather than rather than hurtling in the subway to Wall Street. So, and then I realized that actually academia is a pretty good lifestyle for doing that. It allows you to be reasonably quantitative in work, very applied. Business school actually, I think it, in my opinion, it overpays its professors because the MBA programs are like so expensive. I keep telling my deans, I think you can see that I was not cut out to be in industry. I keep telling my dean at my every salary revision that I'm overpaid. And then they keep laughing at me. But I keep telling them, why are you paying everyone so much? Why don't you give everyone a cut and reduce the undergrad tuition and MBA tuition? I said we are likely charging too much to these kids. But but I just started. What happened is in '98, when I was at JP Morgan, actually was a very interesting period because Russia had defaulted on its debts. Southeast Asia had gone through a very painful crisis in 97, 98. And actually, there was a big hedge fund long-term capital management, which was about to fail in August of 98. And then I realized that actually these financial crises are like a very interesting thing to study. It's like a low frequency, but very high amplitude shocks, which kind of happen in a fairly punctuated manner. And then I started reading about economic history of financial crises, all the panics that used to happen that then led to the Great Depression, and how the banks were stabilized for a while after that. But then, by 70s and 80s, the things started becoming excessive again in the financial sector. So yeah, that I did my PhD on that topic. That time, it was a very interesting phase because, that was a wave of deregulation of Wall Street going on that time. And so no one was interested in the stuff I was doing, which was saying that, when these financial crises happen, things can get very bad. You have to ask banks to hold a lot of shareholder equity as a capital to buffer against these shocks. That there could be runs on banks, and most people, even in academia, were like, what does this guy smoked, like before coming in. So of course it didn't get a lot of reception, and it was hard to publish my research in top journals early on because they were like, oh, bank runs used to happen in 20s and 30s, like, yeah, what is this guy talking about? And of course, there were a few of us who were doing this work still, including Guram Rajan and others. But, he was able to publish his research, unlike me, in top journals. But then, so in a way, the global financial crisis and the housing meltdown came about. And of course, for me, it was like God-sent opportunity to like show that what I've been doing has been worthwhile and is worth studying and all that. So paradoxically, if there hadn't been a global financial crisis, you would not have invited me today to this, to this gathering.
Question for you. I'll be surprised if you haven't heard about the Black Swan from Nassim Taleb. This, what you're talking about, is one of those Black Swan events, right?
So yes and no. So my work is all about saying that it was not a black swan, that it was a white duck. So my work is all about showing that essentially we keep creating incentives for banks and the financial sector to keep growing its leverage, and we keep pushing growth through the financial sector as a means of achieving short-term growth in housing markets, auto loan markets, and so on. And that we keep going through these low-frequency boom-bust cycles, which are, of course, they manifest as though they are black swans, because you don't know, which shock is going to put an economy into tailspin. But the vulnerabilities when that event happens are predetermined, and they are actually engineered to be very high, because you're actually telling the financial sector, don't worry about the risks, either we'll take care of them, or, regulators who are supposed to be on the job protecting depositors and whatever insured amounts the taxpayers are going to pay out, they start sleeping at the watch if they are also taken in by either themselves or politically by delivering growth in the short term. So I think my one departure with Nassim Taleb is exactly what you said, which is that he views these as though everyone is just doing whatever they have to, and you get hit by these random low probability events. In the kind of work I do, actually the political economy, the regulatory interests, the markets are very often all working together to actually build vulnerabilities in case such a shock materializes. Because, with leverage, you can actually create a lot of growth in the economy in a short period of time, the way housing markets are always on steroids in the United States. They were in 80s and 90s. They were put on steroids again after the global financial crisis. And just look at what we did after the pandemic. The housing market was put through all kinds of support, and it had like a spectacular run up all over again. And in a way, the heating. So I think the last year is actually an interesting counterpoint, because everything that has happened in last year is very gradual. It's like Fed has raised interest rates very steeply, and yet we have seen like a 35-40% stock market correction. Of course, whether it will lead to a hard landing or not remains to be seen. But you can see that in 20 and 21, we really built up a lot of leverage and vulnerability to like an overheating of the economy. And if the Fed started correcting, mortgages become expensive, housing prices will come down. But then those who are in the last cycle of buying houses will now have very sharp house price corrections, and could gradually, that in fact, delinquencies are gradually rising, auto loan defaults are gradually rising. Commercial real estate is, of course, the big sort of elephant in the room, because people are working from home. Commercial real estate occupancy is only 50 to 60% in most cities, and it's going to come down. So that's going to mean that there's going to be a lot of shakeout of all this. But that's sort of like one important departure. But overall, I would still say that Nassim Taleb's Black Swan view is better than a view in which there are no risks.
So what I'm hearing you say, Viral, is okay. So there are low frequency, high impact events, but not unpredictable. You're seeing it because you're studying it. You've studied the history, but you're saying it's systematic and it's predictable, whereas Nassim saying was it's unpredictable. That's what distinguishes the black swan from the white ducks. Right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So that's kind of roughly right. I would still say though that to give him I would lean in his favor on one aspect, which is the term predictable, which is that I don't think even with the research we are doing, we are able to do a great job of when a crisis will happen. So the way Mervyn King, former governor of Bank of England and NYU colleague, the way he puts it is that the best predictor of a crisis is that you are in the middle of one.
So you don't know the timing, but you can see the storm.
Yeah, you don't know the timing. I think what our research is able to predict is that if there were to be a shock, will the fallout be very bad? And by tracking measures of leverage, the pace at which credit has got created in the economy, how fast have balance sheets of banks grown over a period of time? By measuring those expansion rates, we are able to predict that if there is a shock, the fallout will be very bad. And I think that's the subtle kind of departure between the two. And in fact, I take the view that you should not try to predict financial crisis because it's very, very, I'm not saying you shouldn't try to do it, but you shouldn't rely on models that are trying to predict financial crisis because you don't know when they're going to materialize. But what you can do is you can say that Japan is exposed to the risk of tsunamis. And so if it wants to place a nuclear reactor, it should not be on the coasts of Japan. It should be inside. So there should be like a buffer that protects the impact of the tsunami to the nuclear reactor. So that planning, that like reducing vulnerabilities, you can do even if you don't take a stand on whether a crisis is going to happen tomorrow or not, And so if you take a pure black swan view, then in a way, you don't know what to do. So, the argument becomes, oh, should you really even prepare for black swan events because they happen once in a century? Whereas we are saying no, regardless of when they happen, there are certain factors that affect whether you will have a bad fallout when that shock happens or not. And you should make the system resilient and less vulnerable to these shocks. And so, then it becomes a little bit more of a science rather than a pure art that, you can ask very tangible questions, which is that, okay, if there is a 40% correction in the global stock market, can the financial sector weather it? If there is a 20% correction in the housing market, will the financial firms survive or will there be a run on the financial firm? And then you can ask the question, okay, how much shareholder capital there is in JP Morgan? If there isn't, don't allow JP Morgan to pay out huge dividends. They should actually save those dividends inside the balance sheet so that they can absorb the loss when the bad things happen. So then it leads to a little bit more concrete policy for what to do with this financial sector. But I think the deeper issue that the work really talks about is that these growth cycles and the leverage cycles, they are actually engineered through short-term political fixes, that the political economy starts corroding actually the independence of the regulatory institutions. Those who are supposed to be the financial stability watchdogs, they become growth cheerleaders because their political masters are actually telling them, listen, I need growth at all quarters to show for the next election that's coming up. And it happens the world over. It happens less sometimes in better better institutionalized countries. But we've seen it happens in United States, it happens in India, it happens in Scandinavia, So I think that's the other thing which is a bit missing from the Nassim Taleb view of these financial crises is that not all, but many so there are some financial crises which are just entirely behavioral, like the dot-com crash, Like, there was a new technology, people started getting very exuberant about it, stock prices became very sort of almost uncontrollably high. But then there are some crises which the housing market cycles especially, they are more driven by froth that is explicitly engineered by governments and regulators. And so in the Nassim Taleb Black Swan view, there is no room for political economy. Whereas I think financial cycles are deeply connected to the political economy cycles and, whether how desperate an economy is for growth. And actually, I show my students, I teach credit risk. So I show my students that over the last 3 to 4 decades, actually all kinds of credit cycles have become more frequent. So in the 30 to 40 years after World War II, you had a period of remarkable stability, actually. And over the last 3 to 4 decades, all kinds of credit cycles, sovereign, municipal, housing, corporate, these cycles are now moving through ups and downs at a much faster frequency. And I think it's because growth has actually slowed down in the developed economies. It was much higher in the post-war sort of growth miracle that came about, tremendous technological innovation. And then from 70s, growth has not been that hard to engineer. Some of it is because growth moved to countries that opened up, like China, India, and other parts. And the developed economies haven't fully figured out how to adjust to such a massive opening up of 2 or 3 large parts of the world, if they are now not just sitting closed, doing nothing practically, and they suddenly opened up. And I think the developed economies have therefore partly resorted to, like, I like the phrase Raghuram Rajan used in his book Fault Lines, which is let them eat credit, which is, throw credit at the problem rather than finding a way to give people sustainable livelihoods. And it's a challenge, of course, but it means that that's one lens through which you can make sense of these ups and downs, which seem to be happening with more remarkable frequency. And then, it's very complex. When growth is low, countries don't cooperate as well with each other because they're very desperate to protect growth inside. And so geopolitical risks rise as well. Oil is a big geopolitical good in a way. You start seeing a lot of tensions around that. So, yeah. So it's I would say, I still think relative to ignoring risks, I think Nassim Taleb's view is a fantastic first step. But I think if you then wanted to think about why are things happening the way they are, then a pure chance view of the world doesn't take you very far. And then you need to understand the political economy, regulatory, and the leverage cycles that are driving.
Viral, which brings
there were a couple of questions, right?
Yeah, but Mohan has a question. Viral, how did you end up at RBI? And some of this might be sensitive if you don't want to share in public.
No.
Respect it. And your experience of working for RBI, I know that Raghu was there and the nephew Arvind was there at the same time.
Yes. No, the sensitivities we'll find out once you post it on YouTube. Let's just have a good time right now.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah, we'll see it in the comments. No, so because I was working on financial crises, I felt that central bank is like the best thing that could happen to me. I can put all the work I'm doing, and my work is very applied. It's not just conceptual, it's both conceptual, but also very data oriented and also always trying to think about what you could do as a policymaker. You can do like counterfactual exercises and so on. So So I'd been sort of building my CV, I would say, for at least 10 years, if not more, to get to have a shot at something like this. I was very clear right from the beginning that my best shot would be in India, being an Indian citizen, which I still am. And also because I feel even though I've left India, I think at a very deep level, I feel I understand India. I understand how it works. I stay in touch through reading, through talking to people who are in India. Like you learn, as we were discussing right at the beginning, you learn so much about economics by just talking to the common man. It's like when I'm in India, I like to talk to people I meet, whoever they are. I still believe that my best index of inflation was asking my mother about the cost of pav bhaji at home and asking my drivers the cost of fish that they were buying from the fish market. And you then of course have to extrapolate a little bit from that. But so I feel at a deeper level, while my understanding of the United States and Europe is greater through my research because the data are available more easily. But if you ask me in feeling the pulse of something, I feel I have a better pulse for India actually than I do for I don't know. I don't know why, but I feel maybe if you listen to a lot of Kishore Kumar songs, it's like you become you can even understand the Indian economy. But no, so I think what happened is Raghu became the governor and Urjit Patel was the deputy governor at that time. I had already started interaction in 2009 or 10 with CAFREL, which was the finance research arm of the Reserve Bank of India. So I was already doing visits for research interactions. I had been appointed to the International Advisory Board of Securities Exchange Board of India when UK Sinha was the chairman of SEBI. And so I was I was also then doing sort of semi-advisory roles with the Feds, with some Feds and some policy bodies in Europe. So I think my CV was really kind of right for that kind of a central banking role in India. India was going through a bad banking crisis. It wasn't a crisis in the sense of runs because we have state-owned banks, so there are not as many runs. But the bad loans problem after the global financial crisis, 4-5 years of lending was very severe. It had been delayed. So I think when Raghu left and Urjit Patel became the governor, the deputy governor position opened up. So I applied. They shortlisted a few people. I was interviewed on video on, I think maybe around 10th of December 16. It was kind of a strange time to be considered because they had just demonetized a month before. So fortunately, I think one of my best timings in life was that for whatever reason, I was not at the central bank at the time of demonetization. I joined like 3 months after because I think the initial period I can just imagine must have been completely crazy.
Yes.
I think I just can't imagine what they were going through. And so I was spared all that. I joined on 23rd January. Actually, I give a lot of credit to the government for appointing me, not in the sense that, I just think that it was very clear from my CV that I will go after certain issues, especially on the bank NPA front. But it could be that partly maybe the system needed a little bit of like a shock rather than just doing a little bit epsilon incremental. See, policy by and large, you will see that mostly it happens incrementally because people want to not take big risks. They could backfire, you could get it wrong, etc. But sometimes the problems are just festering to such an extent that they are actually holding back the entire economy. You know, if you have a banking sector that's not lending money at reasonable costs to deserving borrowers, you know, you can't have an economy that's thriving in such an environment. So I think in a way it was good timing. Some things needed a little bit of a jolt. I was using my public speeches and desire to write and make an academic research-based case for policy reforms. I had a certain template. I used to always frame the problem as, okay, this is not a problem that's just happening in India, that this is a problem that has happened in many parts of the world. This is where it happened in the past. This is what they did. This worked. This did not work. This is the problem we are facing in India. Now, what are the policy options on the table? Is it a good idea to continue to ignore the problem, or do we need to wrestle it right now? And I actually thought that this sort of template by and large worked. They liked someone who would not, like, no one in India likes to be told about India from outside, you know. So at the end of the day, you know, they still view, most people still view me as like a foreign trained economist. Kidhar se aaya hai, you know, what does he know? You know, this, that. So of course, they don't realize that you can study today any economy in great depth, you know, sitting in your office. Of course, it doesn't give you the full feel if you are on the ground. But I think this packaging of the arguments has not been. See, the biggest thing you have to fight in policy making in India, in my view, is that somehow Indians have this sense of exceptionalism. You know, that we are very exceptional as an economy. That our problems are exceptional, our people are exceptional, our solutions have to be exceptional. Therefore, you get something like demonetization, like a very exceptional solution. You know? So sometimes it takes a little bit of distilling the evidence from the rest of the world to say that, listen, this is not okay. Economics is not like laws of physics, but you know, like certain things are very similar in different parts of the world. If United States government doesn't run its balance sheets very well, beyond a point, people will ask questions about their ability to repay debts also. You know, it's not like they can do whatever they want and somehow it's an exceptional country and it can get away with borrowing any amounts. Okay, maybe more than other countries because of its stature geopolitically as a reserve currency, etc. But, you know, ultimately some limits start hitting. So to that, persuading people to understand that you know, listen, every problem is different. You have to find some unique fixes in the end which are customized for that problem. But it's not like there is no science to this altogether. You know, you can learn from experiences of other countries in the past. And you can learn from their successes and failures. You know, there is some learning that is useful to the problem solving of the unique problems that each country has. And you still have to devise your own unique solution, but it doesn't have to be ignoring what's happening in data in other parts of the world. And I think, so I had a little bit of a blueprint to make it work. And I thought in the end, actually, even though sometimes we were liked for what we did, sometimes we were not liked for what we did. Even to date, we are sometimes held responsible for holding back India's growth in 2018. On balance, I think we held the ship together, in my view. And even when we butted against the government on some policies, my sense is they are the biggest beneficiaries of the resistance that we put up. Of course, they will not and don't have to acknowledge it. I don't think anyone is looking for public recognition of that type. But I think certain actions were extreme for the kind of challenges India was facing, and they had to be resisted. And so it was very interesting. I didn't expect for a moment that there would be a dull moment in India. You know, India is like, like India is super interesting even on a normal day. Like, so when things are not working out, of course, it's like even more interesting. So I found it very exhilarating, like, even though it had its challenges, but it was, I did anticipate many of them, but until you go through it, you don't realize what a fun experience it would be. And I have no regrets doing it. I have no regrets with the choices I made. And if I had a chance, I would do it all over again. If I had a chance, I would do something else again in India. But there were two aspects of it which were personally also I should just make a note of. One, I did want to visit my parents in their 80s, and so it gave me a little bit of an opportunity to do that. Fortunately, I'm a Bombayite. RBI's main office is in Mumbai. So this was great. I actually lived with them. We have a fairly modest apartment in Parla West. I just took that rather than the accommodation that RBI offers. So it's a little bit of a commute every day to Fort and back. In fact, there are only three things you can do in my room in that Ville Parla apartment. You can sleep, you can get up, and there are two things you can do. You can either go into the bathroom or you can go to the table and write your speeches. So and the second part of this is very important, which is that my wife and son chose to stay back in New York. So I was there by myself, and I didn't exist in the system. I don't think I received a single mail at my home address in those 2.5 years. I didn't exist. So it was almost like you have come and found this guy who's hopefully right for the job, planted him into this RBI office. He has nothing else to do other than do central banking. I used to play a little bit of tennis at Bombay Gymkhana. And he's living in a place where when he wakes up, he can either shower or he can write his speeches. So it was very intense. I used to come back once a month to see my family. I did 25 trips in 26 months back and forth. My average trip in New York used to be 36 hours, and travel would be 36 hours or 48 hours. So in hindsight, it was quite brutal, but personally very satisfying in the sense that I got this time to spend with my parents. But personally also kind of a bit rough because of this long distance back and forth. The time difference with India is just very challenging. You miss the window to talk to your family, and it's like the time you are awake, they are sleeping. So yeah, but it was great in its own ways. It was very challenging, but very redeeming at the same time. Yeah, you realize I had never thought I would have the courage to write these kind of speeches I did. But you realize at the end of the day, you are just solving a problem. This is the challenge that is facing. Based on your research, I thought this should not happen. And so you said, okay, how do you build a case for it? You have to create a public debate about this position. And in a way, if that's the right thing to do, it makes some people unhappy. You realize that's the problem you're trying to solve. It doesn't matter who is involved in who's going to be unhappy with this, because you're just trying to solve a problem. And so sometimes that clarity of thinking helped a lot in simplifying what could otherwise become a very complex problem. Okay, if I write this speech, who's going to become unhappy with it?
What will be the
consequences? This, that, and all that. But sometimes if you just say, no, this is the problem I'm trying to solve, what's the right solution? And then
so Mohan, there's a lot of background noise from your side. I'll mute.
Yeah. I think it may not be. My side should be okay.
Oh, yeah, your side is okay. I think from Mohan, yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Hey, let's open the floor for questions. Arjun Divita, a few years senior to you. He's actually.
One thing I would say is that my experience of working at RBI was that the staff at RBI was just really fantastic. For the kind of level of rewards that a public institution in India can offer. And we don't always have the strongest institutions for training in finance, economics, etc. But the level of learning they do on the job their commitment to the institutions, functions, the sheer hours. It's one thing to put in hours as a governor or a deputy governor, because you have so much stature and prestige and responsibility. But to have that level of commitment down the line from your staff, I hats off actually to their work ethic, and whoever the previous governors like Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Dr. Reddy, Dr. Bimal Jalan, Dr. Subbarao, Dr. Rajan, Dr. Patel, and now Shaktikant Das, whatever they are doing to create and keep up that work ethic in the RBI human resource, truly outstanding, actually. So, as I said, that was part of the satisfaction of the job, was just the joy of working with the people there. So I think on that, I agree on exceptionalism about India, that our human capital is truly exceptional, but I don't think our problems are exceptional.
Hey, let's open the floor for questions. A topical one would be Adani, somewhere between what Gautam Adani is saying, what Hindenburg is saying, and what Ashwath Damodaran is saying. Somewhere between there, where do you stand in this continuum?
So I think it's interesting. So three things. One, see, clearly the stock run-ups made no sense, And so if you talk to people on ground, many good analysts would already say that they don't know what's going on. Some of them even knew that probably there's some round tripping likely happening through the FPI route. I don't know. Ultimately, the regulator has to verify that is happening or not. But there were already concerns in the market that something like this could be happening. So it clearly deserves to be investigated by the regulators. But whatever it be, whether it's a bubble or it's a manipulation, clearly the prices made no sense. To have P multiples in the range of 100, 200, 300 makes no sense. And as my colleague Ashwath Damodaran points out, for an infrastructure company to have that kind of a PE multiple is really a kind of, it sort of violates the basic laws of stock price valuation. I think the second point that is a bit worrisome is, we had a lot of concentration prior to 90s of state-owned companies. So every sector was dominated by state-owned companies. So what's the big thing that happened after the 90s liberalization? We gradually broke those monopolies. We didn't always privatize them, but we did backdoor privatization by allowing private companies to compete in many sectors with them. So gradually the concentration of the largest inefficient public sector units reduced. But I think in the last 10 years, I would say now the private sector concentration in India is rising. The large industrial group companies are now becoming too large. They are in too many sectors. They are probably getting too many allocations, in my view. And it could very well be. So one very interesting view is that rather than running an industrial policy through the government balance sheet, because that requires going through all the bureaucratic apparatus that you have, that the new model is that you identify 4 or 5 national champions and you tell them to do the projects. Now, because you're asking a private sector company to do it, it's easy to bypass the bureaucratic apparatus of the government machinery. And sometimes now my worry is whether you are asking them to do deals that they would on their own not do. Which is that if it was left to be a pure business decision, they would not do it. But because they are asked by the government to actually do a particular transaction in infrastructure or in a foreign country, etc., they are beginning to end up doing. So one of my concerns, not just for the company in question, but even otherwise, is whether a part of the growth of these industrial companies is actually centrally engineered by having them as national champions who you ask to deliver stuff for the country, because you can't do it very well on the government bureaucracy machine. But the problem then is concentration is a risk. You have key man risk, which is that execution becomes very centered on part of a few companies. Second, you could have a problem of them now being seen as national champions, and therefore no one in the credit and equity markets questions them, because they say, okay, these are the blessings, or they're going to be grandfathered in some way whenever problems arise. So that then leads to capital misallocation, because their credit and equity is not being priced in a fair manner in markets. And the third problem I have is that this kind of concentration also gives them pricing power. So then that can start in motion a level of inflation in the economy is very high, because they can always charge markups that are very, very high in the product segments. And you know what India does is India keeps very high tariffs on most goods, on external goods. And so those tariffs allow then these folks to not only remain protected, but now also to charge higher markups. So I think a lot of goods in India are expensive compared to where they can be. One, because foreigners are not allowed to come in, and two, now these incumbents are so concentrated that they can charge very, very high markups. So I think some of the issues that are coming up, in my view, are actually bigger and broader than the specific issues that have been flagged by the short selling company. I would actually focus on a broader question of whether private sector concentration in India is becoming too high, whether too much is being done by too few industrialists. Are they being used as a part of a centralized industrial policy? And what are the consequences of all this for inflation, financial stability, efficiency of allocating capital in the economy? So,
makes perfect sense. Yeah. Let's open the floor for questions. Arun, Jerry is always quite active.
Yeah, there is a question as to whether the Heidenberg report is really a research or just a bunch of accusations. See, at some level, what is interesting is that now that it has come out through a short seller, a lot of people are now writing reports, sending emails around saying, oh, there was always talk about all this. Actually, even when the likes of ILFS and housing finance companies in India got into trouble in 2018, again, once the problems came out, the chatter was again that, oh, on the street, there was always news that these folks have some problems, they have some skeletons up their chest. So to me, even if these are accusations, the question is, why wasn't such a report written out of India? I think to me, that is the real question that bothers me, which is that if most of this is news that was already out there in the markets, people knew about it, etc., then why aren't short sellers and analyst firms writing out these reports? Something is keeping them back. Maybe you can't make money short selling in India as much. Maybe you would come under scrutiny, or maybe you would be seen as unpopular, and there could be consequences of that. And that is what worries me with creating these national champions. And I stress national because then they are seen as being aligned with the present day administration. And that can create fears of consequences if you even undertake an activity like short selling or something like that. So it bothers me that the report came from an outside research entity and an outside short selling company rather than from inside India.
Cool.
A couple of questions.
Yeah.
So this is Arun. You've explained well that a few industrialists have gone across large segments and given this. At one time, companies would diversify by going into various fields, and then I think a McKinsey report long ago said you stick to your knitting. So people who stuck to what they were doing did really well. And now it looks like some people have got every industry possible. I mean, like these cases, and then there's a risk. Do you think that risk, and then it's over leverage and all the things that you talked about? unless they're protected, this bubble has to burst sometime. Some of the industries, you think that's going to happen?
So I think that is the bigger question. In my view, I would not make this so much about the specific company in question. Of course, you have to investigate that first because the specific accusations are there or allegations are there. But I think to me, the bigger questions are, could this be happening across board with the large companies? Second, is there enough public transparency of their ownership structures, related party transactions, governance practices, the way money is actually circling between them and some of these so-called foreign portfolio investors who apparently are almost entirely invested in a single company at times. So is there enough transparency actually for the markets to know whether you should be scrutinizing some groups and balance sheets more than others? And third, exactly the questions you raised, which is the size of these companies and their pervasive nature of their presence, is it now making debt inefficiently cheap for them? Are there risks not being priced? Is there an implicit too big to fail guarantee that's being attached to their existence? Are they pricing products with high markups and causing inflation to gradually move from 4% to a 6% level as we are seeing in India? I think all these are sort of questions that I hope will be investigated beyond just the immediate case that needs to be analyzed.
So now, MRTPC is not MRTPC doesn't exist anymore. MRTPC doesn't exist anymore, where it's all concentrated, monopolies, restrictive trade practices.
It certainly doesn't seem to be that effective, because you look at India, and I joke sometimes that when I'm in India, I wake up in the morning and I have to ask myself if my garments have been sold to some companies by the government, because everything that is like being set up or being sold is going to the same set of names, as they call, I was talking to one of my colleagues from Israel where they made an effort to break up some of the large monopolies, and he said one of the problems of having these monopolies or oligopolies is that everything goes to the usual suspects.
Yes.
And it's hard to not reach that conclusion with simple casual empiricism about how things have happened over the last 10 years. Everything seems to be going to the usual suspects.
Yeah.
Now see the
challenge. That's what Ashwat says. That's what Ashwat says. Ashwat says, hey, large country, if you go to Korea, it's going to happen. Japan is going to happen. All countries go through a similar model of economic development, right? Yeah.
That's right. And I think, but then the question is, one, do you have the right antitrust policies? Are the markets pricing their risks? Do the markets have the credibility that if a large entity fails, they will also go through the round of creative destruction the way that a smaller company failing would? Or are they somehow going to be protected in some way through support of state-owned financiers like public sector banks or insurance companies and so on? I think these are the important questions, which is, will the presence of a large company lead to inefficiencies that then entrench themselves? So I think the debate becomes interesting because until now, until this short seller report, every time you raised questions about the growing presence of a few industrial houses, the counter argument given was, oh, but they are so good at execution. The counter now, whether that execution is getting around government rules, whether that execution is having an apparatus to get things processed quickly, whether it is on-ground execution at the end of the day, whatever it be. But the counter argument always given was that, no, the reason why they deserve to be so large is because their execution is so great. But I think what the short seller report has led to asking questions about is that, okay, but at what cost, at what price, and are there inefficiencies in the system that could prevail because they have now become so large? And I think we need to do more. I'm sure Securities Exchange Board will do a very thorough investigation, as most people expect it to. We'll see some action, but I think we should ask a broader question, not just about this company, in my view. It's about whether India really can afford such a large economy having an increasing concentration from just 4 or 5 industrial groups. I think that's the bigger question.
On another note, lots of people talking about the US dollar not being a reserve currency, with China and Russia trying to get away from SWIFT. What's your thoughts on that?
I think we have to wait and see. These shifts happen very gradually, at least to start with. Certainly trade as a result of the war is getting a bit polarized. Geopolitically, clearly things are not great between US and China. So China will want to use its size and muscle to set up some regional blocks of trade which reduce the US and the dollar hegemony. I think as of now, my sense is that it's not these issues which, in my view, are the fundamental problem for the dollar. I think the problem for the dollar, if anything, would have been something like a runaway inflation. I think you can see that I'm doing some work now which shows that basically if treasuries, US treasuries are declining in value at the same time as the stock market is declining, then it's no longer a good hedge. So for the world to hold dollar assets, of course, most of it is not held in just cash. They hold it in US treasuries and things like that. So if that is not going to hedge you against a global downturn, which is what has happened over the last year. In last year, bonds have lost tremendously and stocks have lost tremendously. And that means that if you are holding a 60-40 portfolio of equities and bonds were really not giving you any hedge to the stocks. They were tanking at the same time as the stocks were tanking. So in my view, it's more important that Fed get inflation back on track, and a reserve currency can't have a situation where the inflation outcomes are very unpredictable. Central banks' actions are very unpredictable, because a reserve currency must have fixed income assets in that currency which are very, very stable in value. If anything, they should appreciate in value when the rest of the world and the stock markets are going down. That happened at the time of global financial crisis, for example. Okay, US itself was imploding, but the prices of US treasuries actually rose. So that was a good hedge. This is the kind of reserve asset you want. But what happened in 2022 is not the kind of reserve asset you want. So central banks who are holding US treasuries, they're losing value doing nothing, just because, the inflation has been so high and that's eroding the value. So this is not to underplay the geopolitical shifts and the concern that dollar was used for sanctions and as a weapon in the war and so on. But to me, those are very long-term trends, and we have to see how that plays out geopolitically. But I think in the short term, I think the charge is with the Fed, in my view. They have to bring inflation more credibly down, I think, towards the target levels of 2%. Some of us think they are relaxing the pedal too soon, because already, the froth. I just look at the price of Bitcoin to know whether the froth is building up in the market again. And at least so in India, just the way the Pambhaji index from my mom was a good price of inflation, here I find that froth in the US markets, Bitcoin is a good indicator.
So not to disagree with you there, but there's a global Big Mac index, right? So yeah, that's your supposedly a good measure of inflation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
But to go back to what we were talking about, Arun raised the question and you were talking about it. So yeah, the dollar is not going to lose its reserve currency status overnight. But what I've been reading, and I haven't done research on it like you have, is that more and more countries, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whoever else is not part of the Western Alliance is buying up gold because that's the true hedge, and they will trade in gold as opposed to the US dollar because they don't want to deal with the dollar, or the US playing the big bully.
So I think that's the question, Mark, which is, so my conjecture and my research is suggestive that the shift into gold is more because of inflation problem, and that it's less because you are concerned about geopolitical risks on the dollar front, which is that.
But hang on. Inflation, if inflation is high, I mean, that should be, inflation was high, right? And it's coming down now, but the gold didn't go up. But that's because I think that, and again, my naive understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, is because traditionally gold is the hedge against inflation, but last year it didn't go up.
It didn't go up. No, it didn't go up, but in spite of a rise in rates, gold did not lose much value either.
Correct.
So gold was very flat over the year. I would have loved to have an asset in my portfolio that was flat over the last year.
Right.
So the only thing I'm able to tell myself is that my human capital has not got eroded over the last year.
So the US dollar rose, I thought, my understanding again is because the US dollar rose against the other currencies, right? That in US denominated terms, the gold didn't rise. But if you look at it from other currency standpoint, it did.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, and I think that's a good point. What happens with the US dollar is that its movements are sometimes a bit tricky, because one, you have to factor in not just what's happening to US conditions, but also, of course, whether alternative hard currencies are in any better shape or not. And post-war, they've also had a very high fuel-linked inflation. The other hard currencies, maybe with the exception of Switzerland, I think inflation is very high in most advanced economies. I think Switzerland is only 3% or something like that. But it's a very small country. It cannot, with its outstanding issuance of bonds, it cannot satisfy the world's need for investing its safe assets. And second, what happens is the period of high inflation also tends to be period of high volatility generally. And in periods of high volatility, even if dollar assets are not the best assets in an absolute sense, you still increase your allocation to safer assets. And so, okay, so what I'm trying to say is that, yes, I lost money on my treasuries, but I lost far more money on my equity positions over the last year. So in a relative sense, I still have to increase the allocation to fixed income assets because I'm losing far more in equities than I am in treasuries. And so the dollar also gets a bit of benefit globally from that sort of just equity to bond readjustment, especially from safe investors like central banks who will now say, I need more reserves because, there's more uncertainty. So they will just increase their demand for investing in dollar assets. But they're simultaneously moving to gold, exactly as you point out. And I haven't looked at gold returns in other currencies, but given that dollar appreciated, I'm pretty sure what you're saying is right.
So the other piece of it is now, okay, while the US was raising rates, the others, Japan and Europe, was slow to do that. Now that they have started raising rates, the relative terms of, in relative terms, the dollar is not as attractive.
Yes.
And so that it's now losing some of its steam.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay, but okay, boil it down to us simpletons that don't live in this finance world, right? So for a lot of us on this call are senior to you and senior citizens. So what does the common man do, given your perspective of all these, the macro view of the world and the political backdrop of why certain things are going the way they are, that you were talking about these cycles of, juiced up growth and whatever, whatever the underlying factors, you're researching that. But what does one do to hedge against the risks of okay, you can't predict it's going to happen 2 months from now or 6 months from now. But how does one position oneself so you don't end up eroding your purchasing power at this stage of the game?
So what I tend to do, which is sort of relatively a passive strategy, is that what I keep in the riskier part of my portfolio, which is truly for the long term, I try to hold really like a global portfolio with that. I don't take a bet on the US. I don't take a bet on emerging markets, but in some allocation, I hold a little bit of everything, including actually some commodities, some inflation linked products, etc. So that, I truly have like a market which is very diversified. What is its downside is that it has no spectacular years of run-ups. What is its upside? It has pretty much no spectacular down years either. So I'm kind of just ensuring I get a long-term return, which is very steady, 4-5% year after year after year. Now, last year was bad, even if you build a global portfolio, but that's the best you can do. The second thing is you do have to manage the interest rate risk then on the savings. Clearly, if you put all your money in a bank deposit, you are earning nothing. If you put it in a 10-year bond, you have a huge interest rate risk because the value of these bonds is going to erode very sharply when interest rates rise. So I like the strategy that some of my colleagues follow, which is that they basically start investing in T-bills, the funds which are linked to treasury bills, because they were short duration, so you're not exposed to as much interest rate risk. And then you keep earning a high interest rate over the short term when you do that. So you can, I think, shorten the duration of your treasury portfolio, probably increase allocation actively if you want when risk rises, but not be stuck with everything in a bank deposit, nor everything in a long-term bond, because one is not giving you anything and the other is changing in value too swiftly with interest rates. So
the alternative that I was looking into was, instead of a bond portfolio, given the interest rate inversion, the inversion of the curve, invest in CDs, which are for shorter terms, right? You can have a 1-year ladder, 2-year ladder, whatever.
Yeah. So some banks have started offering better rates on CDs, but many large banks are still holding on to very low rates. The CDs, the only issue is the liquidity, right?
Right. So you do a ladder, right? So if I invest, I did it through Fidelity. Again, I'm throwing this out for others to consider and chime in, because I obviously don't know what I don't know. So I invested, say, $10,000 through Fidelity, and you say, I want a 1-year ladder. So they'll invest $2,500 in a 3-month CD, break it into 4 portions, do 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year. And then you can do an auto roll where when the 3-month matures, they roll it into another 1 year. And so you're continuing to roll that with, to address.
So that's a little bit like this treasury bill strategy, because implicitly there, once your treasury bills mature, you would have to keep rolling it over into longer dated bills. So many banks, if you go to their asset managers inside the branches, they are also offering these kinds of packages. So you can do it through Vanguard or Fidelity or one of the big asset managers, or you can even do it through your bank branches, actually. Typically, banks tend to have higher fees. That's the only downside. Otherwise, the products that they have are probably similar. The one advantage of going to the banks is that they will count what you invest in these products towards your minimum balances to maintain the high quality service accounts if you need that. Otherwise, generally, most of these are cheaper with the large asset managers because they are trading in very large volumes and they give you the benefit of those reduced transactions. So I agree with you. I think slightly lower maturity ladders, which are then being rolled over, is better because you're not taking on huge interest rate risk of long-term bonds.
Hey, we are coming up against the 90-minute window. Any questions before we let Viral go back to his family and work? And One thing which Viral will take a rain check on, as you know, he's a great composer, great singer. I did request that he sing one of his many songs, and he said he's got
maybe another time. I have to go back to IIT Bombay to get the
inspiration.
Get the juices flowing again. You know.
That'd be wonderful.
Maybe I should do B.Tech all over again.
We'll take a rain check on that.
The voice is not in great shape. So, but thank you so much. You've been very patient. I think to put up with someone on Saturday morning for 90 minutes.
This is very, very
enjoyable. Thank you for taking the time.
It was great fun.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Viral. Have a wonderful weekend. Catch up soon.
Thank you.
And one of our guys on this call, Milan Mehta, is in New York. So next time I'm in New York, I'll get you guys together. We'll go have. Milan takes me to one of his favorite dosa shops.
Yeah. Look forward to coffee or lunch. Thank you.